Gold. For millennia, it's been a symbol of wealth, power, and stability. It was at the center of global economic policies that shaped the modern financial system. Today, we're diving into the history of gold as a currency, from its role in the world wars and connection to the US dollar, to its role in present-day economics, investment, and power. Gold has been used as a currency for well over 3,000 years. From the Lydians in ancient Turkey, who were among the first to mint gold coins, to the Roman Empire, gold was prized for its scarcity, durability, and universal appeal. It became the foundation of trade and wealth across civilizations. Over time, many things have served as currency. 4,000 years ago, cowrie shells were used as currency in Africa, China, India, and the Pacific Islands. Farm animals, copper and bronze nuggets have all served as currency before and during the early Roman years. Starting about 2,800 years ago, silver and gold coins were used by the Greeks, Romans, and others. Even salt was used as payment as early as 2,500 years ago in Rome, West Africa, and parts of Asia. So, what are the key characteristics for something to be used as currency? It has to be not only a good medium for exchange, but a good store of wealth. What does that really mean? It needs to be durable, portable, divisible, uniform, stable, generally accepted, and scarce. Over time, gold has proven to have most of these traits. It's durable, it can be fashioned into gold coins and bars, it's widely accepted globally, and it's scarce, with the supply of gold growing only as fast as humans can dig it out of the ground and refine it, increasing the supply at roughly 2% per year. In the ancient and classical eras, gold was first minted in Lydia, modern-day Turkey, in the 7th century BCE, and it was vital in Greek and Roman economies. During the early Roman Republic, bronze was initially used as currency, with gold occasionally used for high-value transactions, especially after contact with Greek and Carthaginian civilizations. The Roman Empire reigned from 27 BCE through 476 CE in the West, rising and declining in power as its gold reserves initially grew through conquest and then were depleted through overspending. In the medieval period, Vikings in the 8th to 11th centuries raided gold from Christian monasteries. The Crusades, starting at the end of the 11th century, saw European forces seize vast amounts of gold from the Middle East, including Jerusalem, Egypt, and the Byzantine or Eastern Roman empires. After the fall of Rome, the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire continued to use gold as currency until it fell in 1453 to the Ottoman Empire. During the age of colonialism in the 15th to 18th centuries, the Spanish and Portuguese conquests of the Americas extracted massive amounts of gold from the Aztecs, Incas, and others. By the 19th century, most major economies had adopted the gold standard, linking their currencies to a fixed quantity of gold. This system created stability and trust in international trade, but it also tied nations' economic policies to their gold reserves, setting the stage for future conflicts. Britain was the first major country to officially adopt the gold standard in 1819. Although, like many nations, gold currency was used informally before this. This stabilized global trade after the Napoleonic Wars, a period during which European gold reserves had been drained. The US adopted a de facto gold standard in 1834 and formally in 1900. Germany adopted the gold standard in 1871 after the Franco-Prussian War, using reparations from France. France also adopted the gold standard itself in 1878. Japan adopted the gold standard in 1897 after economic modernization during the Meiji era, and Russia adopted the gold standard in the same year under Tsar Nicholas II. Under British colonial rule, India effectively followed a gold exchange standard from 1898 onwards, where the Indian rupee was linked to gold via the British pound. Similarly, as part of the British Empire, Canada, Australia, and South Africa followed the gold standard during this time. During World War I, many countries had to abandon the gold standard to print more money for military expenses, leading to inflation and devaluation of their currencies. In 1914, Germany, France, and Russia abandoned the gold standard at the start of World War I, mainly to be able to fund their armies using printed currencies not linked to gold. After World War I, countries tried to relink their currencies to gold. Britain tried to return to the gold standard in 1925 at the same level they had used before the war, which proved disastrous as it overvalued the pound, causing deflation and economic hardship. The Great Depression, which started in 1929, further strained economies. By 1931, more countries abandoned the gold standard. The United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, South Africa, India, and Japan all abandoned gold convertibility. The United States followed shortly after in 1933, delinking its currency to gold to combat unemployment and stimulate growth during the Great Depression. Other countries also adopted and abandoned the gold standard during similar timeframes. By the late 1930s, most major economies had moved to fiat currencies, marking the end of the classical gold standard era. During the tumultuous times of World Wars I and II, massive quantities of gold were transported from Europe to the United States. This was done both as payment for wartime support that the United States provided, but also to secure financial stability, so that their gold was not stolen if enemies breached their gold vaults. During World War I, countries like the United Kingdom and France shipped over $1 billion worth of gold to the U.S. to pay for weapons and supplies. By the end of the war, the U.S. held nearly 40% of the world's gold reserves. World War II saw a similar trend. In 1939 alone, the Bank of England shipped $2 billion worth of gold to North America for safekeeping. The Belgian government also transferred more than 200 tons of gold to the US, and the UK to protect it from Nazi forces. At its peak in the late 1940s, the US held over 21,775 metric tons of gold in Fort Knox, equivalent to more than 400 million troy ounces. This stockpile represented the financial bedrock of the post-war economy, and it cemented America's economic dominance at the time.
The forces of Germany have surrendered to the United Nations.
At the end of the Second World War in 1944, the United States had tipped the balance of power in both the European and Pacific battlefronts. The US had kept the UK from total devastation, liberated France from Nazi control, and pushed back Hitler's German forces to a final defeat in Berlin, as the USSR suffered tremendous losses battling Hitler's regime in Eastern Europe. The world watched the first atomic bombs dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima by the United States. By the time the war ended, most of the victors, the Allied nations, and defeated countries or Axis powers, were industrially and economically devastated from years of bombing and war. Except one nation. The United States had emerged from World War II as the strongest nation, with an intact military-industrial complex and gold coffers stocked with the largest stockpile of gold ever recorded. The countries of Europe and Asia needed to rebuild, and the world needed to jumpstart global trade. That meant a return to the gold standard. Currencies once again would be linked to gold.
At Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, delegates from 44 allied and associate countries arrived for the opening of the United Nations Monetary and Financial Conference.
After World War II, the Bretton Woods Conference of 1944 established a new global economic order. At the Bretton Woods Conference, the US dollar was declared the world's reserve currency, pegged to gold at $35 per ounce. Other currencies were pegged to the dollar, creating a fixed exchange rate system. Countries could now do business in US dollars, swapping their own currency for dollars to transact with another country, who could interchange those dollars for their own nation's currency through global banks. All global trade of petroleum would be traded in US dollars, giving birth to the term petrodollar. Countries trusted this system because the United States had promised to exchange US dollars for gold. Give us back $35 and we will give you an ounce of gold from our vaults. Initially, this worked to build trust and jumpstart the global economy in the post-war era. Under this system of gold-backed money, governments had to be economically responsible. Economic decisions, fiscal policy, monetary policy, production, trade, taxation, and spending, all of these things were tethered together by the link back to gold. Governments had to be disciplined to conduct business and trade in a fixed currency regime. Cracks would eventually begin to show. Countries with fixed exchange rates have less ability to affect economic cycles through their own monetary and fiscal policy. They can't easily stimulate or slow their economies as needed. But perhaps more importantly, the system relied on trust in the Fort Knox Gold Bank of USA, which started to break down. During the 1960s, the Bretton Woods system faced immense pressure. To fuel a global economy with a growing number of transactions in US dollars, the United States had to increase its monetary supply of dollars. The world had to believe that the US actually had enough gold to support the rising number of dollars floating the global economic system. Countries began to wonder, did the US really have enough gold to back US dollars? France, led by Charles de Gaulle in 1965, questioned the US's ability to back its growing supply of dollars with gold. Under President Charles de Gaulle, France famously redeemed 1.5 billion of its dollar reserves for gold, sending its navy to transport it back. Other nations, including West Germany, Switzerland, and Italy, quickly followed suit. By 1971, the US was hemorrhaging gold reserves, with more dollars held overseas than gold in its vaults. The U.S. gold reserves dwindled to 8,133 metric tons, less than half of what they were at their peak. On August 15, 1971, attempting to prevent a further run on the Bank of U.S. gold reserves and a U.S. dollar currency crisis, President Richard Nixon announced the end of dollar convertibility to gold, effectively ending the gold standard. The moment, known as the Nixon shock, marked the beginning of a new era, fiat currency.
We must protect the position of the American dollar as a pillar of monetary stability around the world. The strength of a nation's currency is based on the strength of that nation's economy, and the American economy is by far the strongest in the world. Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
Fiat money, unlike gold-backed currency, is not tied to any physical commodity. With no anchor to gold underpinning the global financial system, countries could now manage their currencies more directly by raising and lowering interest rates, influencing exchange rates, printing money, and spending beyond their means. Fiat currency's value is based on trust in the government's ability to manage the economy. But by 1971, 2 generations since the end of World War II had grown up with a stable currency anchored to gold. Trust had been built in the US dollar at home and abroad. And as Nixon transitioned the world to fiat currency, people continued to trust him and transact in their nation's currencies just as before. Since 1971, the US dollar has become the world's dominant fiat currency. However, this shift has come with challenges, including inflation. The purchasing power of the dollar has declined significantly. What you could buy with $1 in 1971 now takes almost $8 today due to cumulative inflation of almost 700%. But it's not just delinking the dollar to gold that has caused massive inflation. The economist John Maynard Keynes advocated during the Great Depression of the 1930s for deficit spending by governments as a means of stimulating economic growth. This meant spending beyond the amount of money that the government had by borrowing and going into debt. The approach is widely acknowledged to have helped the United States rebound from the Great Depression, although not without significant inflation. Keynesian economics remained in vogue until the 1970s and gained more prominence after the 2008 financial crash as quantitative easing, and again in response to the COVID crisis of 2020. Keynesian deficit spending and quantitative easing remain major governments' main response to severe economic crises. In fact, it's not just the United States. Most developed nations have now employed Keynesian economics, including the UK, Canada, Sweden, Japan, and others. In the era of fiat currency, ever since 1971, the United States government has increased its monetary supply continuously. At first, it could be argued that this was necessary to meet the growing need for US dollars in the global financial system, as oil and other commodities have relied on the US dollar for transactions worldwide. But, with few exceptions, US government administrations, whether Democratic or Republican, have spent much more money than they took in through taxes and tariffs every year. This deficit spending has led to a ballooning national debt that is unsustainable at this point. America's national debt has grown from just under $400 billion in 1971, at the time of the Nixon shock, to $35.5 trillion in 2024, an increase of more than 8,900%. And all of this money printing and deficit spending has led to persistent inflation. But what does that really mean for the value of a dollar over time? The dollar has lost most of its buying power over the years. If we look at the value of $1, starting in 1960, the trend becomes clear. By 1977, one US dollar had lost half of its buying power. You could only buy half as much stuff with a dollar in 1977 as you could in 1960. By 2023, that same dollar had lost more than 90% of its buying power. It was only worth 9 cents. Inflation destroys the value of each dollar. Today, fiat currencies are the standard worldwide. For over 50 years now, the US and most other nations have used fiat currency. While they offer governments flexibility in monetary policy, they also carry risks. Mismanagement, such as excessive money printing, can lead to inflation or hyperinflation, as we've seen in the US, eroding public trust and economic stability. What can we learn from looking back at history, at other nations that have used fiat currencies? It turns out that many countries have tried fiat currencies over time, all with the same result: massive depreciation that eventually leads to failure of the currency and economic instability. China in the 10th century under the Tang dynasty was one of the first to try fiat currency notes. But by the Ming dynasty, overproduction of paper money in the mid-1400s led to severe inflation, devaluation, and economic instability. There's an interesting lesson here. China had successfully used paper money for almost 500 years, before overprinting by the Ming Dynasty resulted in failure of the fiat system, at which point they reverted to a silver-based monetary system. In 1661, Sweden's Stockholms Banco issued the first European banknotes. Initially, they were backed by precious metals, but overissuance led to a lack of confidence and the bank's collapse. The Swedish government later took over the issuance of paper money, but by 1776, due to rapid depreciation, Sweden returned to a silver standard. During the American Revolutionary War in the 18th century, the Continental Congress issued paper money known as Continentals to finance the war effort. Lacking gold or silver backing and faced with rampant counterfeiting, these notes quickly depreciated, leading to the phrase, "not worth a continental." This experience instilled a deep skepticism toward fiat currency in the United States. Post-World War I, Germany faced massive reparations and economic hardship from 1921 to 1923. To meet these obligations, the Weimar Republic printed vast amounts of money, leading to hyperinflation. At the peak, prices doubled every few days, and the German mark became virtually worthless, causing widespread economic and social turmoil. The government introduced a new currency called the Rentenmark, which was backed by land value to stabilize the economy. But by then, the damage of confidence in the Weimar government was done, paving the way for extremist political parties like the Nazi Party, ultimately contributing to the downfall of the Weimar Republic and Adolf Hitler's rise to power. History shows that under the right circumstances, meaning responsible issuance by government to avoid overprinting, fiat currencies have been employed as an effective means of economic exchange. But the risks of overprinting, deficit spending, and devaluation leading to inflation are ever present. Today, the United States and most other nations have increased their money supply by printing and issuing new banknotes tremendously. These currency increases inevitably lead to devaluation of the currency and inflation, which reduces the buying power of workers and retirees on fixed incomes and effectively transfers wealth to shareholders through stock price appreciation. So, how should we think about the fiat currency in the United States and other nations today, given that successive governments continue to print as much as they want, stoking inflation and destroying the buying power of the currency? What alternatives can we invest in to preserve our buying power and wealth over time? Hard assets like land, real estate, precious metals, and other commodities all tend to rise in dollar terms, acting as a hedge against inflation. In uncertain times, investors often flock to gold, silver, and platinum. During the 2008 financial crisis, gold prices surged to record highs. More recently, as inflation rates spiked in 2022 after quantitative easing led to massive increases in dollars in circulation, gold again reached over $2,000 per ounce. In the first few months of 2025, as the world grappled with new tariff policies under the Trump administration and ongoing wars around the world in Ukraine, Palestine, Syria, Sudan, Myanmar, and others, gold again reached an all-time high, approaching nearly $3,000 per ounce. Gold is widely viewed as an effective, uncorrelated asset class to diversify investment portfolios and protect monetary value against inflation, political uncertainty, and war. More than 10 years ago now, new challengers like cryptocurrencies entered the scene, but gold's legacy as a symbol of stability endures. It is yet to be seen if cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin will have a lasting place in investors' portfolios over time. The story of gold is a story of power, trust, and adaptation. From ancient coins to central bank vaults, gold has played a crucial role in shaping global economies. While the world now operates on fiat currency, Gold remains a portfolio diversifier and a timeless reminder of the delicate balance between wealth, trust, and economic stability. As always, please support us by clicking the like button and subscribe to the channel to see more.